Hey G,
Hey,
how are you?
good.
Good.
Just waiting for this account to leave. Did you want to share your screen?
Sure.
All right. So, welcome everyone to the next in our series of community conversations. We've been having these online as a way to really bring different kinds of perspectives to people by having different conversations with different professionals, activists, and organizers, and different people with different levels of expertise. And today, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the UASK platform and changes that have been made to it to help reduce incidences of violence and increase awareness of bystander intervention and bystander intervention tools. All right, and so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Greerlin Thomas. I work with Men Can Stop Rape here as a training and technical assistance program manager. And what that entails is the creation of different programming for Men Can Stop Rape, the creation of different kinds of curriculums. Training and technical assistance also includes work that we've done with the Department of Justice to advise different colleges through the Office of Violence Against Women on how to improve campus primary prevention resources and opportunities. We've also worked with the Department of Health and Human Services to develop a interconnected network of schools who have coordinated community responses to sexual assault and other forms of violence on campus. And I have my colleague with me, Hannah Goldstein, today. And Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Greerlin. I'm Hannah. I'm a program coordinator at Men Can Stop Rape. And among the many things I work on, one of them that receives a lot of my attention is the ASK platform. For those not familiar, ASK stands for Assault Services Knowledge. It's a free and confidential platform. It's a mobile app and a website that is basically, it aggregates, it gathers before, during, and after sexual assault resources, so that, in the wake of an assault or before one happens, you've got all of your resources right in one place. So actually, Greerlin, before we get into the conversation a little bit more, I'm hoping to just touch a little bit more briefly on what ASK is, just so we have a kind of baseline, if that's cool.
Definitely.
Ask DC, we have a UASK version, which stands for University Assault Services Knowledge. And this is available at all 8 universities in Washington, DC. So that includes not only local resources for sexual assault, but also campus-specific resources for sexual assault. And as I mentioned, it is a mobile app. And it's an extremely customizable platform. We've got a 911 panic button. Some of the universities have a call campus police function. We've got an emergency notification system to let friends and family know where you are or if you're in need of assistance. And like I mentioned, a bunch of campus-specific resources. So, we do have this platform, the UASK platform, in a lot of very specific campus communities and regional communities as well. And so I guess I just wanted to speak to the fact that we recognize that all campuses and communities have their very specific cultures and responses around sexual assault and bystander intervention, and that we've kind of designed this platform with that in mind, that it's extremely customizable.
I particularly like the feature where you can sort of customize messages that it will send out if you're in an emergency. So you can sort of add contacts that you know personally, and it'll send them out specifically to people that you've told that you want to be informed if you're in like a crisis, or if you just want to update them about where you are and things like that.
Yeah, I know that for myself, I always kind of have these like run-of-the-mill texts that I send to people, and it would be much easier if I could just do that at the touch of a button when I'm on things like a date, for example.
Yeah.
So maybe now we can move a little bit into thinking about bystander intervention and the way that it's interacting with technology.
Mhm.
So, in advance of this conversation, I was thinking about, you know, if we're talking about bystander intervention as something that needs to be accessible and that's being advanced by technology, for me, I kind of feel like we have to think about who's involved in bystander intervention. And in my experience, this is traditionally painted as something that is for women because it's really on women to prevent assault. I think we get these cultural narratives about who assault happens to. And so traditionally, this is kind of painted as, a woman's issue. So I just kind of went ahead and I generated a list of things I've been taught to do, that my friends have been taught to do to avoid being assaulted, which I think speaks to this issue, how people kind of conceive of it. But when I was thinking about what men are told to do to prevent assault, I kind of had a hard time coming up with anything. I don't know if maybe I missed something or what you think, Greerlin.
Yeah, no, I think when I've done this same sort of thought exercise with other people professionally, or when I've just had conversations with them about the things that they learned about sexual assault, the difference between what sort of women say that they've learned or been taught to do versus what men say is just drastically different, just in terms of the length of the lists. And men are really just sort of not given a whole lot in terms of what they're taught to do. And part of that, I think, is because we don't really conceive of men as being people who are victimized, who can be survivors of sexual assault. We conceive of that as something that happens to women, even though we may know, like intellectually, that there are women and men who are both survivors of sexual assault. But there's a sort of cultural narrative around who it's, quote unquote, supposed to happen to. And so, if anything, I feel as if men are often told how to avoid being accused of sexual assault rather than how to get help if they are assaulted, or what things to do to avoid being assaulted. And so, in that way, you can see that we really sort of shift the burden of dealing with assault onto women in a very disproportionate way,
Yeah.
which, as you said, impacts how people come to bystander intervention work.
And I think you make a really interesting point when you talk about how, like, intellectually we may know that, like, this is not true, but I think the cultural narratives really paint it in one specific way, which makes not only understanding the aftermath of sexual assault, but encouraging people to intervene and build a more proactive culture. That becomes kind of there's that tension there. So this is why, rape is a men's issue and why bystander intervention is also a men's issue. As we just discussed, men rape, men are raped, men know survivors of rape, they know perpetrators of rape, men are confined by rape, and men can stop rape. I'm wondering if you can speak at all to what we mean when we say men are confined by rape.
Yeah, definitely. So when we say men are confined by rape, what we mean by that is we've created, back to what we were talking about, these cultural narratives, we've created these scripts that we sort of give to women about what it is that they have to do. And in these scripts, we consistently remind them that men are to be viewed as potential threats, right? And we know, based off of statistics, and we know based off of just people's experiences with sexual assault, that it's not just strangers in a bush. It can be colleagues, it can be coworkers, it can be close friends, it can be family members, right? And so if you are in a position where you have to be on guard and do all these different things, do this list of things to avoid assault, which can happen anywhere, and it's assumed that it will happen at the hands of a man, then as a woman, you're sort of put on guard constantly around men, right? And so what that does to men then is that it sort of puts up this wall, it erects a wall that prevents authentic expression, that it prevents real feelings of safety, prevents real honesty, it prevents real engagement, right? And so when we say men are confined by rape, we mean that the assumptions that are made about men by these narratives we've created don't leave room for men to be part of the solution. And so in trying to develop different ways that men can be involved in primary prevention, we have to sort of understand that the narratives we've created only put them on one side of the matter, which is important to talk about, right? It's important to talk about men as people who who perpetrate violence, but it is also important to talk about how they can be involved in prevention.
Absolutely. And, I was thinking about my own college experience and trying to step into the mindset of what does it mean to say men are confined by rape. And I was thinking about my time studying abroad when I was a junior in college, and just before going, all of my friends, my family really just, I just kind of had this like barrage of like caution. Everyone was telling me, you have to be careful, don't travel alone, don't walk alone, always look where you're going. And I think it's useful to an extent, and I understand where they're coming from. But I found myself in the first months of my time abroad, just like totally gripped by fear. And it's really hard to imagine, and always being kind of like activated that way. It's really hard to imagine being able to create a relationship, an authentic relationship with someone from that state of activation. So, I had to do a certain degree of work myself to find the line between caution and fear. But I think that for me, that just experiences really illustrates the ways that like it can be very hard to build relationships or to engage authentically, just given the ways that like women are told to be responsible for sexual assault response and prevention.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it creates these drastically different experiences of what are fairly common occurrences, right? So like, what does it mean to go to a party, to be out at a bar, to be at a club, to be out at a restaurant? I think because we've sort of created this divide and created this sort of expectation of assault and place the burden on women, it really impacts how they interact with public life in a way that's so different from what men are taught to do. And so in one way, I think, I had an experience in college where I was just sitting around with a bunch of friends and listening to them just sort of very casually mention either instances where they had been harassed or potentially assaulted as if it were common or normal, because it was for them in some ways, right? And so it's very scary to think about that when that hasn't been your experience, but it's actually a very common one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think with that, we can begin to think about if rape is a men's issue as well, then so is bystander intervention. If it's not just on women to address assault after it happens, it's also not just on women to learn how to prevent it. And as we discussed, we know that it's not only women who are sexually assaulted.
Mm-hmm.
So as we come to this, I think I got moved around a little bit, but that's okay.
Yeah. I think to the point that you made earlier.
Yeah, I'm missing one of my slides here. There we go.
Not a problem. Yeah.
We'll come back to it. So, in thinking about bystander intervention, I think as we broaden our understanding of who is involved, we also have to broaden our understanding of what bystander intervention constitutes.
Mm-hmm.
For us at Men Can Stop Rape, bystander intervention is proactive, it's pro-social. It provides everyone with the awareness, skills, and ability to constructively and safely intervene in situations where social norms that support sexual assault are being expressed or acted out. So to break that down a little, it's basically just about, actively participating in a culture that doesn't condone sexual violence. And, we know that that's not just, that doesn't stop with like just not harming someone.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens with bystander intervention in particular is that there's a sort of singular idea of what it is, sort of a popular culture presentation of it. I'm sure we've seen it in movies, we've seen it in television, or we've read about it or heard about it, right? Where it's like you're going to witness an assault or some kind of incident and you're going to have your big hero moment where you jump in and save someone. And while that, may happen, the odds of that happening are fairly low for the average person. So what does the bystander intervention look like for them? And so we say, there are plenty of ways that people can intervene in everyday life that they don't typically think of as bystander intervention moments. It's, someone making a comment that goes unchallenged. It's someone saying a sexist joke that makes someone uncomfortable. It's all sorts of things that we just maybe know we're uncomfortable with or that we don't like, but we don't think of as moments that need intervention per se. And I think one of the things that we're going to really get to explore here today is how UASK can sort of bring different approaches to bystander intervention to people's hands in a really easy to use way.
Yeah.
Especially, I think we're going back to the idea of how men are engaged around these issues. One of the things that I've seen a lot from professionals who try to get men to do any kind of work in primary prevention or bystander intervention around sexual assault is that, they say, well, if I'm not assaulting anybody, then my job's done, right? Like I can just hands off, right? And so it becomes very difficult to get them to sort of participate in activities that are being done. And I think we can really sort of if we make action easier for folks, they may come to the table or feel like they can come to the table, because often I've seen that when these men are talked to, they say, well, I'm interested in this issue, or I know about it, or it affects me, but I don't know how to get involved.
Yeah, I do think that as we continue to explore bystander intervention, like it is something that is so much more accessible than people think. So now I do want to get a bit into the technology piece. I think good bystander intervention on its own is accessible. You don't have to be an expert to do it or to intervene in a situation. It's responsive to situations. It is proactive. You're not just waiting for violence to happen, and it's empowered. So to me, that means having options among alternatives. You can select a course of action, and you're not kind of stuck to one particular pathway. And I think that where technology really comes into play here is that technology really enhances all of these aspects about bystander intervention. From being able to shoot off text messages, share locations. We have really improved all of the ways that we can intervene. But I think one thing that really services these points is having a specific avenue to do that with. So we'll talk a little bit about the ways that UASK kind of like caters to enhancing all of these aspects about bystander intervention. So taking a look, we can go back to traditional bystander intervention if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay, cool. We're just gonna jump back here. So maybe now is a good time to mention we've recently added a whole host of bystander intervention information and materials to our Ask platform. And we've started off with a very traditional understanding of bystander intervention, which is absolutely still useful.
Yeah, I think, when we think about the more conventional ideas of bystander intervention, there have been so many tools that have been developed that can be kind of overwhelming almost if you're someone who's just sort of jumping in. So the idea of consolidating all of that into something that people can just sort of access with the touch of a button, I think is really cool. So I think UASK sort of taking that step is really helpful.
Yeah. And so beyond that, though, we're working, as I mentioned, towards a more pro-social understanding of bystander intervention. So how do you really step into this mentality of saying, it's not only people who are affected by assault, it's not only experts on sexual assault, it's everybody who has a responsibility to build a more constructive culture. So, speaking to this like empowered aspect, we've also included all of these resources as to techniques for how to intervene in more casual ways. And this is not just, seeing a problematic situation unfold in front of you, but how are you just like interacting on a day-to-day basis with people in a way that's accountable and, shed light on the fact that you don't support this kind of harm.
And back to the point you were making earlier about the definition of bystander intervention, creating a culture where that kind of thing is not supported as well.
No. So yeah, I think one of the things here as we begin to get even more into the technology aspect is challenging media. I think that, you know, we are so often consuming, whether it's news or social media or any of these things, and it can be really easy to kind of be like, deaf to the ways that like sexually violent language is used casually. So for example, the phrase child prostitute, which I know our partners at Right for Girls have like a whole campaign about calling out when this happens in news media outlets. So really just thinking about how on a day-to-day basis you're holding institutions and people accountable is really in itself, like every little action, even conversations about that are bystander intervention.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't even say deaf to. One, because I think that kind of maybe stigmatizes certain disabilities, but also because I think that we can take more accountability for our own sort of media literacy and sort of awareness, right? And so if we, right. And so part of challenging media is noticing, being able to notice, having the opportunity and the skill set to notice something is off or that something is bothering you. And then, like you said, feeling empowered to act, having the skills to act. And so I think media especially is something that we all sort of passively consume without even really thinking about it. And there are so many things that we could just spend a little bit more time just problematizing or even just saying, hey, I wonder what the message is here.
Absolutely. So now I want to talk about, I think, almost like the new frontier of bystander intervention, which is digital bystander intervention. And I think that this is really relevant now, not just because so much of life is, digital on social media, but also, campuses are grappling right now with distance learning. And I think with COVID, more so than ever before, so much of life has gone online. So I think that one of the ways that we're trying to bring people into the fold with bystander intervention is really encouraging them to think about how their technology is an asset to them, but also how they may be consuming sexual violence through their technology as well, and what roles they might have in interrupting that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially in a moment like this, where so many different schools are either entirely online or engaged in sort of a hybrid model of some students are on campus and some students are online, it's really sort of important to sort of have a tool that can sort of combine different resources in a way that's accessible digitally, while also at the same time providing people with, like you said, different techniques for how to engage these situations that might arise in this sort of new digital frontier of Zoom and Google Meet and all these different places.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the ways that distance learning complicates like student to student interaction. I'm thinking about the ways that distance learning complicates faculty and staff and administration interaction with students. And so, with, the phone or the computer basically being the medium through which that communication is passing, I think that it can be really hard to communicate clearly or even to access information. One of our colleagues the other day actually referred to Ask as the kind of like Fire Stick or Roku of sexual assault apps. And I thought it was such an excellent comparison, because what we're really doing on UASK is we are consolidating all of the possible resources that you might need before or during or after an assault, which makes supporting someone, which makes contacting the correct office, contacting the correct administrator so much easier when this face-to-face communication is more difficult than ever before.
Right, and I'm thinking especially of new students who are maybe entering college for the first time. I think, back when I was a freshman, how scary it was to sort of enter this space and, you don't really know who to go to, you don't really know where things are. Mm-hmm. And so having something that consolidates some of those resources, whether it's, needing to speak to, a therapist, or whether it's, wanting to know what kinds of different agencies and organizations are local that are being assisted or that are assisting your university. Mm-hmm. It's a really convenient way to sort of have that all at your fingertips and not have to worry about your own newness getting in the way of getting the help that you maybe need.
Yeah, and I think about what an app like this would have meant to me as a student during my time in college, and again, face-to-face communication wasn't even a concern at that time, but it would have meant a lot to me to know also that my university was putting the kind of care and attention into making those resources as accessible as possible to me, and that even though they exist in a very real and tangible way, recognizing that we're accessing almost everything through technology right now. So again, back to that piece of empowerment as being able to access and have alternatives at your disposal.
Definitely.
Yeah. So maybe we can transition to questions soon. I do want to say as a final thought, I think we're in this social and cultural moment where we know that it's not enough not to perpetrate harm. It's not enough just not to be racist. You have to be anti-racist. It's not enough not to perpetrate sexual assault. You have to be anti-sexual assault. I think we're at this really important turning point culturally and societally where you have to actively build what it is you want to see. And I think that campuses are faced with a really interesting task of doing this kind of under a microscope during COVID. Like I mentioned, UASK is a really excellent and flexible platform that places can be using not only to actually connect their students and their communities to resources, but also to communicate, this is a priority for us. This is something that we are seeking to actively contribute to. And that is its own kind of bystander intervention.
Definitely. And I think, what I hear when you say, it's not enough to be, not sexist, but anti-sexism, right? Mm-hmm. And those sorts of things. What I hear in that is the need to make action easier. It's very easy to tell people what not to do, but I think that our job as educators, as trainers and facilitators is to give people tools that build, like you said, absolutely, rather than just, work from a deficit model. So, what does it mean to give people different skills that help them actually in situations where they want to intervene? And I think UASK is one way that you can give those skills to people, is to provide them with a platform that sort of not only brings all those resources together, but can also be an educational tool to help people connect with different ways of learning about this issue and learning how they can give back.
For sure. I think we might have some questions. Gonna get our colleague Will back on here.
Hello, everybody. Awesome. So I just want to say thank you for everyone who tuned in today. And thank you to Hannah and Greerlin for a great conversation. We have 3 questions so far. The first one is from Kyle in Michigan. He wants to know how he can continue to practice bystander intervention on a day-to-day basis, but specifically connected to culture on college campuses.
Well, I would think, one of the things that I think what I hear in that is, culture is interaction, right? It's interaction with others. It's how you develop social norms. So I would say, think about what you want the culture to be, what culture is and what you want the culture to be, and how bystander intervention can be helpful in shaping a new culture. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, I'm getting a little gruff here. So in that, there are probably things that happen on a day-to-day basis that you either don't think about as needing an intervention, or you think about as things that are sort of awkward or uncomfortable, but you don't really know how to think about it. And getting with other people and saying, does anyone else feel the way I do about these things? I think that's an important part of bystander intervention. One of the things that we talk about a lot with bystander intervention is that people often at times know that something makes them uncomfortable, but they're afraid that they're the only person who's bothered by it. But if everyone feels that way, then they're not the only person who's bothered by it. So if people would, seek each other out or take the courageous moment to be the person who's visible in that moment, they can then attract other people who feel the same way. And then you all can then work together to sort of change the culture. And when you're working with others, it's not quite as scary as when you think it's just you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of that. I really think that bystander intervention at a certain point, it's about, moments, it's about interactions, but it's also about just kind of possessing and stepping into an overall mentality of, being unconditionally committed to this idea that sexual violence is not okay. So, in other cases with other issues, if something offends you, you would say something, or if something offends you, you might gently question someone. You might indicate that, their comments are not okay. And I think that bystander intervention is really like the same kind of all the time posture.
Yeah. And I would add that UASK is not only an app, but also a website. And so you can access those resources around learning more about bystander intervention through the website as well, if you just need to connect to more information.
Thank you very much.
Great. All right, thank you both. So we have another question that just came through on YouTube. So this is from F. Floaty. They say, thanks for this, very informative. When doing workshops, how do you include women and trans/masculine folks in the curriculum or programming?
So funny enough, I feel like going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this session about how to bring men in, is that often at times, the trainings have very few men. It's a very rare moment where the men outnumber the women or the non-binary individuals in the room, and so often at times, our job then is to train, people who are not men around how to engage men, because that's the thing that they're going to go back to their different campuses or such and such to do. But in terms of bringing other people into this work, I think that our approach is based on things that are by definition sort of inclusive because of the way that they talk about different dominant and counter narratives and stories. And so I think it's very easy to adapt these workshops to meet different people's needs, right? And so what we often invite people to do as well is take the skeleton of our work and just take the parts out that don't work. If we're using men at some place and you think that doesn't apply to who you want to work with, or you think that could be tweaked a little bit, we work with people all the time to brainstorm, what would it look like for this to be altered to not focus on men, but to focus on a different group, right? And so I think one of the strengths of what we do is that we're highly collaborative in our work, and that we really invite people to bring their best selves to these conversations. So if there's something that we feel doesn't fit, we're more than willing to make a change, and we're more than willing to invite ideas from people who know more than we do about those kinds of things.
And to Greerlin, I guess I would just add, even in the thought exercise of generating a list about how people are taught to avoid assault, it's so binary. And I think that's, we're speaking to the fact that is such a limitation. That is one of the things that continues to perpetuate violence, is that it is seen as so binary. It is seen as so difficult to include all kinds of people in this framework. And so I think what we're really speaking to is like stepping away from such a static understanding of sexual assault and how it happens.
Definitely. And, when we're thinking back to, what men are taught, I think so much of myself and friends who are gay, bi, or, queer identified men who have these sort of things that they do, these rituals that they do when they go out, because they also fear for their safety. But these aren't things that they were taught. These are things that they learned in the process of sort of navigating the world, right? So going back to how we are sort of failing to equip people with a safer society and the ways to navigate society, right? Like we've created these ideas about who violence happens to that is very exclusive.
Absolutely. Awesome. So the next question comes from Jordan from Nashville, Tennessee. He says, or they say, I was wondering if you all have any success stories you could share about students using the UASK app or website.
That's a really great question. I think that we, as far as success stories go, we see just a huge amount of usage from students on the platform. We have about an equal amount accessing the platform from mobile and from website. You know, as far as specific anecdotes go, I know that we have actually one of the students who was interning in our office, she just spoke to being able to access the app and use it to support a friend who just needed to kind of know pathways to get support. But I think one of the things that actually is really important for us is that it's a confidential app. So for that reason, we don't necessarily solicit like the most specific identifiable success stories, because sexual assault is a really difficult, traumatic, tenuous thing. And so, you know, I think one of the things that speaks to the success of the platform are the analytics that we get, which tell us that students are in fact accessing the app and using it in order to prevent sexual assault and also address it when it unfortunately does happen.
And I think that's been a recurring sort of like matter with the app, which is that, you know, in the name of keeping people's information confidential, it also means that we don't often have the sort of demographic information to be like, you know, oh, these are the people who are accessing it here and when and where and how that sort of thing is. But, you know, that's part of wanting to protect people's anonymity.
Great. All right, so we got a couple more. The next one comes from Erica in Rhode Island. She wants to know, based on your expertise and experience during this moment, how has COVID-19 exacerbated issues of domestic violence and or sexual assault?
Greerlin, do you want
to? I mean, I'm not going to again, play sort of the expert on this. I think there are agencies that deal more directly with survivors who could speak to this matter. I'm thinking, you know, at least locally, there's the DC Coalition. There's, you know, the DC Rape Crisis Center, so many different organizations who do direct service work who can speak to this. I can say that, you know, what I've heard from them is that, you know, in this moment where people are very isolated in their homes, incidences where tensions flare up, where different kinds of, the situation itself causes different kinds of violences to sort of be elevated is definitely a worry or a concern that they've had. And so that's definitely one thing that COVID has sort of brought us, unfortunately.
Yeah, and one thing I will speak to is the way that UASK brings service providers and people who do this work together. It is a platform that is all about, you know, recognizing that often things like domestic violence and sexual assault overlap with each other, that things like housing insecurity is, you know, increases your risk of sexual assault. And so in recognition of these facts, UASK is really a place that unites and brings together all these service providers, all of these resources, so that someone who is experiencing housing insecurity may be able to find on UASK DC some of the resources that they may need, some of the agencies doing this work. Someone who is experiencing domestic violence and has also experienced sexual assault are gonna find something in that Venn diagram that kind of overlaps.
Great. So we have another one from Abby, and I think this is connected to student buy-in. So Abby asked, in your experience, what are successful strategies to introduce UASK to a campus and encourage students to use and download the app?
That's a great question. So in our experience, we have supported schools in doing campaigns, helping them design specifically marketing materials, social media materials, branded materials. This year, you can imagine that hand sanitizer has been a very popular campus giveaway for students arriving on campus, and really supporting you know, schools in pushing this into their system by you know, having webinars for people who are responsible for, you know, whether it's like RAs, getting RAs trained up on UASK and UASK and helping get their residents acquainted with it, or whether that's having sexual assault offices on campus also do devoted campaigns towards this. So really it's just about engaging in a conversation, I think, with specific campuses about their campus culture and what they need. And from there, us working directly with campuses to help them figure out what are their specific needs, how are we going to support you in engaging your student population, which I think is something Men Can Stop Rape has done successfully a lot of times.
I think it's about presenting sort of a united front of like, this is the app that we have, this is how we're going to use it, and we're going to really encourage students to use it. We're going to give them multiple points of contact with the app, whether that's, getting encouragement from RAs to download it, getting encouragement from professors to download it. I know freshmen especially often take those sort of introductory classes that exist to sort of introduce them not just to college, but to the specific university, right? And so it can be something that's done there. I know a thing that we've also done in the past is, we had this event locally here where we were sort of introducing the app because the app was launching on a campus here. I believe it was George Washington University's campus. And so we had this sort of like, setup where we had sort of like people would come in and have little party games, and they could pin up balloons and do little slogans for themselves. And we had a local DJ there who's playing music, so it was kind of a little fun get together. Obviously not something you can really safely do in this moment, but that was a really great way to sort of introduce people to the app because it was sponsored by the app and people were able to come in and download it and then have fun, win little prizes if they downloaded the app, and then stay around to participate, hear a little bit more information, and there may be an online version of that can be done, or some kind of hybrid.
Great. So we have another one that just came in through YouTube, and this one I think is specifically connected to bystander intervention. So this person asked, what would you suggest for people who are very shy or perceive themselves as having very minimal power in their organizations or community as it relates to bystander intervention?
Definitely, I think so. Some of the strategies that we talk about when we do sort of brainstorming about different ways to intervene, a couple that we hear are go to authority figures, people who are in positions of power who you think might be more amenable or understanding of whatever it is that you're trying to bring attention to. So if you don't want to bring attention to it in that moment, you can bring it to someone else who maybe has more room to navigate that situation, is more empowered than you are in that moment. And another thing that we say to do is, bring it up after to the people involved. What is it about the situation that's sort of making you sort of shy or afraid to speak up, and how can you get out of that situation or create different kinds of scenarios where you do feel empowered to speak, whether that's talking with someone individually or to bring other people in who are maybe a bit more forward facing than you are, right? And so, use friends, use resources, use colleagues who can be your backup, right?
And I would add to, just thinking about the ways that technology can support people who are not traditionally in positions of power or don't see themselves as such. I think that, for example, one of a bystander intervention technique is helping people who are in dangerous situations or who may have, had their privacy invaded online, whatever that is, providing documentation is one example. So, this is not advice giving, but more an encouragement to be creative and think about the various ways that technology, you can absolutely brainstorm a lot of ways that technology can service bystander intervention.
I think we can take one or two more. Well,
yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's it for the questions today. So if you all want to wrap up, thank you both again. And thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Will. I would thank everyone for showing up today, who's here, and thank you all for the insightful and thoughtful questions that challenge us and both ask us to sort of really help think through things with you. I hope that we were able to answer them to the best of our abilities, and I once again really appreciate everyone who signed up and everyone who showed up, and this is a really great opportunity to talk about something that we think is a really useful tool. So thank you again.
Yeah, I just want to echo all of that and encourage further questions or inquiries about, this technology or really anything we've talked about today. You can please direct your questions towards me. I'd be happy to engage with you further. You can see my email on screen here, hgoldstein@mencaststoprape.org. Thank you to all for tuning in, and Greerlin and Will for a thoughtful conversation.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks.